everyone. Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. Please listen to our other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is the CEO of Hanhart, Felix Wallner. Felix, welcome.
Hi, thank you for the invite, and I'm really happy to be here.
My pleasure. You're in the Black Forest area, right?
Yes, exactly. So in the southwest of Germany, very close to the Swiss border, as well very close to the French border, where the three countries meet.
It's interesting, though, because, obviously these three countries touch. And there's watchmaking in all three of these regions, but it's not like there's watchmaking in all of these regions everywhere. Not all of Switzerland has watchmaking. And people sometimes, I think, need to look at a map and be like, oh, the watchmaking part of Germany is within driving distance of Switzerland, which is often within driving distance of France. And, it's, even though there's local character, it's really a region of the world. Not all the watchmaking, but it's really a consolidated area that's relatively defined, right?
That's true. And Hanhart was always in the past as well, had strong connections with the Swiss watchmaking industry, because the founder of the company was a Swiss guy who moved to Germany for production, and as well his son remained a Swiss citizen for all of his life.
So there's always a lot of reasons. I remember that Rolex's story is how Hans Wilsdorf said, "Hey, Switzerland has cheap labor. Let's go make our watches over there." Obviously, that's not exactly the case any longer. In the instance of Hanhart, what was the reason for going to Germany for production?
When there was the change of century, so from 19th century to the 20th century, Schwenningen was the world capital of watchmaking. There were nowhere more watches produced than in Schwenningen. And that's why Willy Hanhart, who came from Diessenhofen, not that far away from Schaffhausen as well, he moved to Germany for producing his watches. And that was Schwenningen.
So where does the Hanhart name come from? Is that a person?
Yes, exactly. It was the founder of the company, Adolf Hanhart. His surname was Hanhart.
I just realized that while I've known that Hanhart is one of those historic brands, obviously it's in, the slogan, it's 1882, right? I actually don't know too much about it. And, you look at Audemars Piguet, for example. Yeah, two guys. Obviously, neither of them has too much to do with it anymore. But with Hanhart, I wasn't clear. So how long was it a family company?
There was the son-in-law was still with the company in 2015. So until 2015. And from there, it moved. Well, Simon and I took over. And since then, there is no family connection anymore.
So, wow, what was that like, being the people that acquired the brand from the family that had owned it for, over 100 years? That's a big deal. Usually you're buying it from another holding entity or something like that, but you bought it from the family. That's rare. What was that like?
No, we did not buy it from the family.
Oh,
the son-in-law was still the CEO back then. And then Simon and I took over the role of the CEOs.
Oh, so he didn't own it. It wasn't owned by them.
He was partly owner.
Oh, okay.
But the great change of ownership from the old family to the son-in-law plus new owners was in 1991.
Okay. So what was it that the person that was part of the family still got to work there? Like, that's not always the case. I mean, I know at Breguet, they have a Breguet that works there, but I feel like they just, because they have to. Was that what it was like? They're like, oh, you have the family name. You have to have an honorary role here.
No, not at all. In 1991, Willy Hanhart got out of the company, and he was very old back then, and he just gave the role of the managing director or CEO over to his son-in-law. So his son-in-law, he was called Klaus Eble, and he was leading Hanhart from the 90s towards 2015.
So what was the company doing basically up until World War II? Because I know that when I think about sort of the classic Hanhart watch, I think of a German style Flieger aviator watch. But I don't really know too much about what the company did before then. Obviously, it was in existence for a while. What was the pre-aviator watch like?
Yeah, the pre-aviator time was in the early beginnings. Hanhart, or Adolf Hanhart, just opened a watch shop and did watch repairs in Switzerland. Then when he moved in 1902 to Schwenningen, he started as well producing his first stopwatches. And the great breakthrough was not because he was like building it up. The great breakthrough came with his son, Willy Hanhart. Willy Hanhart loved to do sports. At the beginning, he did not want to get involved with his father's business at all. But then he was at a sport event and saw that stopwatches were only very expensive and available through Switzerland. And that's where he thought he will sit together with a watchmaker to produce a stopwatch for the mass market. And in the 20s, that was when the business really picked up and Hanhart grew from strength to strength. And those were the times before World War. And as well, the building that we are in today in Gütenbach. So he moved from Diessenhofen to Schwenningen. And then in Schwenningen, they had no more people to work for them because they had full employment in Schwenningen. So they were looking for another production facility. And that is where Hanhart moved into the building in Gütenbach. That was in 1934. And since 1934, the brand is producing in Gütenbach with only a very short interruption after World War II.
And where are the watches made today?
In Gütenbach.
Okay, so same place.
Yeah, it's where we moved to in 1934, and it's the same place. So it's really a historic building. When you enter the building, it's as well, it gives you the same feeling because it's such an old building we still have the old wooden floors, and it is very like, it wasn't built at once. There were different parts of the building added over the years, and it has a very special spirit to it.
Yeah, I've been to buildings like that. You're right. They have like a lot of interesting personality.
Yeah.
Are there other watchmakers that are in the area?
Well, Junghans is not that far from us. Stowa, Laco, all the Black Forest brands, basically. And there were, of course, in Schwenningen, there were much more, Kienzle and so on, but many of them disappeared.
Now, you said something about making chronographs at a more accessible price, and it's difficult to sort of put ourselves back in time and imagine, what that actually meant. But I got to thinking, who in the market wanted to buy a chronograph, needed to use it, but couldn't afford it at an expensive level, but now that it was cheaper, could buy it? I'm just wondering, what types of professions or activities opened up if they could afford a cheaper chronograph at the time?
Yeah. You need to imagine, it's hand stopwatches.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And you always need to imagine the time before quartz, before electronics, before everything that we take for granted these days. And back then, in sports, in all kinds of sports, a stopwatch was fantastic. In every industry, when you wanted to time certain work processes. So you need a stopwatch basically everywhere. And as well for doctors when they did measurements of the pulse. And so, in every sport, every teacher in the past had a Hanhart watch.
What was difficult about making a stopwatch, a handheld one, inexpensive? Obviously, they're not too dissimilar to a chronograph, and we know that a chronograph movement has comparatively a lot of parts, a lot more than just time only. It's quite complicated. But what was the key innovation? Was it lower cost labor? Was it some type of other approach? What allowed them to make the chronograph movement or a stopwatch in a less expensive way?
To be honest, we don't have real data on that.
Oh,
but I would as well guess that they. I think they overdid the movement, and as well in terms of production, they looked for cheaper production possibilities.
yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So then the war comes around, and all these brands are now making sort of similar stuff, right? They're making watches for aviation, other things like that. Was it just pilot watches, or was it a whole host of different types of watches? I don't really know too much about that era. Obviously, for a long time, it's been kind of taboo to talk about it, but everyone's always been fascinated by it because, let's be honest, a lot of those designs are still very nice today, right? So they're all icons.
Yeah.
What can you talk about watches during that period in the, I guess, 30s?
Yeah. So we have one catalog from the 30s where there are many, many Hanhart designs in it, like those Art Deco watches. So we did not only produce those chronographs. Back then, there were as well civil watches. But
Okay.
the chronographs were then, of course, the ones that we got famous for, the icons. And in the late 30s, Hanhart started producing the first caliber 40, which is a monopusher chronograph. And after the monopusher chronograph, the caliber 41 followed, and that one is with asymmetrical pusher distance, and those were spec'd by the military, by the government. There is one very similar chronograph from Tutima, and we frequently get asked who was first. Was it Hanhart or Tutima? And we always say, well, at the same time, because both got the request from the government to build those chronographs. I mean, back then it was a difficult task to build a chronograph, and there were not many companies capable of doing it. So Hanhart and Tutima both produced those chronographs. The only difference between the two is that at Tutima, the lower pusher was farther away from the crown, and at Hanhart it was the other way around.
Now, were there other countries other than Germany using these as military watches? I don't really know, because obviously they always are known as, German military watches. But were they sold widely, or was it sort of just in that region?
No, it was just the German army in the times of war as well. Only the German army. And after World War II, Hanhart was part of the French zone, and then all the machinery and all the toolings got deported to Besançon. Besançon was the city where Lip was located at. Lip was back then the biggest watch manufacturer in France. And they wanted to rebuild the Hanhart chronograph, or the chronographs, with Hanhart machinery. And they as well, or Hanhart engineers needed to go there a couple of times, and still Lip was not able to reproduce the chronograph. So they asked Hanhart to rebuild the chronograph as well for the French army. And that was when a watch, there is one brand called Vixa, V-I-X-A, and those watches look identical to the Hanhart watches because they were produced by Hanhart for the French.
And how long was that going on for? Because, you go to the website, you see something like the 417, which is a beautiful design, but it says 1954 in there. That's obviously past World War II. What was the context around that watch being made?
Yeah, that is our most iconic model today. It is after World War II, Germany was not allowed to have an army. Very nice. Was not allowed to have an army for quite some time. And in 1954, Germany was allowed again to have an army. And the 417S was the first chronograph of the pilots of the newly formed army. So it has a lot of history for us. And then there was as well a famous actor in the past who wore it. And of course, that adds to the story.
Who was the actor?
Steve McQueen.
Oh, that was another one of the Steve McQueen watches?
Yeah. He has a couple of famous photos where he's wearing it.
You know, it's funny because these days there's a lot of like inauthentic celebrity report, right? Like coverage, like, oh, so and so celebrity was seen wearing something, brand paid to put it there. It was part of a what they call a style situation for like an event. But the reality is there have been certain very prolific watch enthusiasts that have been celebrities, and they've had an outsized role. You know, there's some of them that live today. Obviously these are big characters, but isn't it amazing how well they've done for watches? And think about the context. No one really cares about the clothes they wore, where they lived, the cars they drove, but the watches they wore. That's so important, right? No one's wearing Steve McQueen's pants, right? Like, yes, there's the cars he drove in movies and things like that are popular, but something about these celebrities' watches that captures people's attention so much. And I just find it really, it's lucky for us, but it's sort of funny. Yeah. It's not like, you know, that's the styling gel he used for his hair. I got to use that. Nobody cares about that. But the watch, oh, that's a big deal.
That's true. But to be honest, I think as well, many people copied his overall style. You know, those leather jackets there is as well a company that is producing his leather jackets, those old ones.
Today they are.
Yeah. But I think really as well with the watches, for us, it's fascinating that, when someone in a very authentic way, and you get the feeling when you see the images of him wearing our 417ES, you get the feeling that he really liked to wear the watch. And when you have such authenticity connected with the brand, it really gives you, well, a special feeling, yeah?
What I found is that certain celebrities, especially actors, who have been in films where they get to pretend that they're people that play with big toys, race car drivers, soldiers, you know, he played both of those. And you find actors today that do the same thing. You know, Brad Pitt, for example, really likes watches, and he's done a lot of this. There's this appreciation for using machinery, plus the privilege of having both the opportunity in films as well as the money to buy stuff. And they become like real tool fetishists. And you know, I think of like Jay Leno, for example, who, you know, made a bunch of money. He's like, oh, great, I get to drive and play with cars, you know, and do whatever I want with it. So I think for me, a lot of times people are heroes because they took their money and they decided to become like hardcore machine nerds, right? And the watch was, you know, it's like, you know, Steve McQueen, he liked watches you'd have to use. He loved chronographs because you got to mess around with it. He was using that stuff a lot. And what I love is that the watch becomes something of fascination because of the lifestyle. It's not a status item, really. It is a tool that incorporates into their lifestyle. And that's, for me, why it's beautiful, but also kind of pure, right?
That's true. And especially when you think about, we're now mostly talking about those male characters. You know, and as a male, you don't have a lot of jewelry and you don't have a lot of things on your body where you can say as well, I want to change a bit of my style. You have the clothes, you have a belt, you have your shoes. But I think the watch is one of the most distinctive accessories that you can wear. And so it's always as well a thing where you put a bit of your personality in. I don't know how to put it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. And this also makes me think about the threat of smartwatches. And there's a lot of people in this industry who feel that smartwatches have made a real ding on business. And I wouldn't say they're incorrect, but the reality is, and it might change in the future, but until this day, I don't care how wonderful of a Garmin or an Apple or, you know, whatever smartwatch, they don't have that personality. They make great tools. They're amazingly fantastic piece of technology, yet they don't give you that same personality that an analog watch does. And for me, that's important because it means that when people want to convey that personality, they're not going to be thinking about their Apple Watch. They're going to be thinking about something else. And that's good for us, right?
It is exactly how you describe it. I thought about doing an AI video where you see all those old Apple Watches piled up on a huge pile, and then next to it you have a mechanical watch. Because it's really, I think, when you look especially at the long term, an Apple Watch or whatever smartwatch gets outdated in a couple of years, and then the whole processor and whatever inside is too slow to use the latest technology, so you need to replace it. It will never have that emotional value for someone when you replace it every couple of years. When you have a watch for, I don't know, 10, 20 years, you have a special bond with it, don't you? It's like the watch made history together with you.
Yeah, but I always joke that the watch has just been obsolete a lot longer. It was obsolete decades ago. You don't even remember. So going back to the 1930s and 40s and 50s, aside from simply making a good, I guess, military spec, chronograph wristwatch, were there certain technologies that made Hanhart watches particularly good? Why was it selected in 1954? What did you bring to the table that maybe other competitors didn't? Was there special innovation, technology? Help me understand a bit more about that history.
Well, I would say that back then, not many companies were capable of producing a chronograph. Even the biggest watch manufacturer of France, Lip, wasn't able to reproduce the Hanhart chronographs. So it was a difficult technology, and that is why they asked Hanhart to build the first chronograph for the pilot. And so after the 50s, Hanhart was really moving at a fast pace and was doing lots of different developments. And we had as well, there were many different calibers. We had as well civil variants of watches. There was a watch called Sans Souci, which was an alarm clock. And well, from the 50s through the 60s, Hanhart was doing as well a lot of different wristwatches. But in the 60s, the wristwatch field was becoming more and more competitive, and Hanhart was the world market leader in stopwatches. The biggest competitor back then was Heuer, and because Hanhart was the world market leader in stopwatches, and everyone needed a stopwatch, Hanhart said, well, we don't do the wristwatches anymore, and focused in the upcoming years on the stopwatch business. So after the 70s, Hanhart did not do any wristwatches for quite some time.
That's kind of interesting. I've always heard it the other way, right? You go from making like pocket watches, stopwatches to wristwatches, you don't go back. That's got to be rare that they actually said, no, we're not going to make pocket watches, wristwatches anymore. We're just going to make, stopwatches, which is very close to a pocket watch. Are there any other companies that did that? I've never heard of that before.
I don't think so. And we're still the only manufacturer of stopwatches, mechanical stopwatches in the Western world. So there is no other company producing stopwatch movements. And we do them with more than 90% in-house in Gütenbach. So
how many do you make? I mean, that's pretty cool. Okay, so today, yes, I knew that. I think it's worth repeating. Hanhart today continues to make a mechanical stopwatch, like you've seen in the movies. You can buy vintage ones on eBay, I guess, but if you want a new one, nicely made, Hanhart is amongst the only companies who will do that. Talk more about this product. Why is this so difficult to make, and what do they cost actually?
Well, you can get them at 400 or 500 euros. Okay. Up to 1,500. But the thing is, and that's what I like to say a lot. We're producing about 4,000 to 5,000 pieces a year. Okay. And the interesting thing in the stopwatch field is we are producing them a lot like they were produced in the 60s, 70s, 80s. We have lots of old machinery for doing all the parts. And it's very nice to see because it's not only those high-end CNC machines. The thing is, because we're doing only that limited amount of stopwatches, we don't need all those automated work processes. So it doesn't matter if the parts take a little bit longer until they're produced. And so today it is for us, it is something very special, the product. But what I wanted to say before, when looking at it, when I talk to someone, and I think for us, the difficulty with the stopwatches is that their perceived value is just different to a wristwatch. When you tell someone we have a wristwatch with a, 90% in-house caliber movement, completely made in Germany, and you tell them, well, the price is, 2,500–3,000 euros, they say, wow, well, that's very affordable. When you tell someone this stopwatch costs 1,000 euros, they say, well, that is a lot for a stopwatch. But basically, it has more or less the same parts inside. It's as well extremely difficult to manufacture. But that's just the case. A stopwatch does not have that emotional value to it. Yet we hope that someday we see at all working desks, we see stopwatches because they become some sort of the accessory for a working table. Now,
this brings me to an interesting question, because we know that in the wristwatch field, the chronograph is a very, very popular product. I've spent a lot of time talking about, for example, Jean-Claude Biver and his interest in the chronograph. But he's the first to sort of say that he doesn't really ever use the chronograph, right? He loves it. People like the look of it. Not that many people use it. So I can understand getting a chronograph wristwatch and maybe not using the chronograph. Buying a stopwatch, it's fun to play with. It's definitely fun to play with. I guess the question is not how people use it. How do you recommend people use it, right? They may not even know what to do with the stopwatch on their wristwatch, but what does Hanhart recommend you do for fun or for utility with a mechanical stopwatch, circa 2025?
Well, of course, you can use it in the kitchen everywhere. You can, doctors still use it. And where we have the highest sales, or where it is mostly used, is in motorsports. There are historic car races where you're only allowed to use mechanical stuff from the past.
Oh, really?
And yeah, it's in Germany. In Germany, it's the so-called hourglass competition part of historical motor races. And there you're not allowed to use mobile phones or any quartz or electronic devices. And there, of course, Hanhart is the tool to go.
Interesting. So, okay, so that makes sense. They're not allowed to use, different ones and get a new one. It's not that expensive. Explain, and maybe it's obvious to you, but explain to people what makes it so difficult. I mean, I think other people, especially in Asia, would make some of these if they could. There's not a huge market for it. That's true. But discuss in detail what actually is responsible for the difficulty, maybe in assembly, or maybe it's difficult to make the parts. But in the stopwatch, I don't think a lot of people have experience with them. And of course, it probably relates to chronographs, but explain the technical complexities and why those skills are maintained at Hanhart.
Yeah, so for us, the real complexity is that we're doing so many things on our own. So we don't want to do so many things on our own. We always asked different suppliers if they could produce parts for us, but they say when we're looking at 4,000 to 5,000 parts per year, we cannot do that for you at an economical price. And always when we then do the calculation, make or buy, we always come to the decision we need to make them on our own, because otherwise a stopwatch would be extremely expensive. And so for us, the difficulty is to really be able to produce every single part at such a quality that at the end you have a high quality product. Because usually what happens, we know it from car manufacturing, we know it basically from every other industry as well. And in the watch manufacturing, it's as well very often that even if companies say, or even if companies have in-house movements, many of the parts are not produced by them because it's just more, not only from an economical standpoint, but as well from the qualities, because it's better if you have specialists in every field. So the very difficult thing for us is to make so many parts on our own and still have the quality.
And I think what's interesting is making those parts doesn't help you for watchmaking. With the watchmaking, you buy movements. I think it's smart to do that. But if you make a full stopwatch movement, like none of those parts can be repurposed into a wristwatch, right? It's its own thing. And
exactly.
If you also made watch movements, you'd have to have, I don't know, like a separate factory for it, right? Like you'd have to have double the machines. I think it's important to be an enthusiast to wrap your mind around that, because you look at Hanhart, if you made your own watch movements, you'd have much higher prices in your watches, but you do make your own stopwatches, which adds to the flavor of the brand, right? It adds to the brand, but people have to wrap their minds around the fact that different products are made in different ways. And this is not unique. I remember at Jaeger-LeCoultre for many years, you had to sort of wrap your mind around the idea. There's a completely different department that makes like the Atmos clock, right? It's got like nothing to do with anything else. It's its own department. Yes, it's something they do. In a way, obviously, I think it's a little bit more relevant for more people, but the stopwatch, that's like your Atmos clock, right? It's a specially unique thing that like only you do.
Yeah, exactly. We as well do them for others. So if we get requests from other brands, if they need stopwatches, we do as well stopwatches for other brands.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
As we're the only ones still producing that just really makes sense as well. But the stopwatch movement is much larger than the wristwatch movement because it's as well built for that purpose. And like you say, we cannot just say, okay, we use the same machinery to do wristwatch movements. Of course, we could do some parts. We as well have a CNC machine. And so we could do certain parts, but we cannot do all of it. We do right now as well, for example, the monopusher modification on our watches, we do on our own. We do some case backs. We do some sort of things in the wristwatch business as well on our own. But there it just makes much more sense for us to use as well the movements that are produced by very capable producers like Celita Soprod in Switzerland, because you can get them serviced as well all around the world, and you don't need to worry about spare parts. The reliability is just fantastic. So it makes perfect sense for us.
Now, let's talk about a little bit today of the Hanhart brand. I think for people who know watches, who are able to compare, they're able to notice that there's a certain group of German brands. You mentioned a few of them, Stoa, Laco, Jungens, that kind of exist in a similar price point, have a lot of similar types of themes, really focus on some of the heritage models. A lot of them are sport watches. Help explain to a novice who's coming in the industry where you feel like you fall in. Because I think I love German watches. I remember the last time I was in Germany, which was not too long ago, I went to Glashütte, different area, but again, still German watches. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what, Ariel? If you only had to wear German watches for the rest of your life, if that's all you could choose, watches from German brands, I'd be okay with that. Because almost everything about what I appreciate in watches, I can find in Germany. And a lot of the stuff I like a lot. But I find it difficult to explain to people how to think about a German watch compared to a Swiss watch, compared to an English watch, compared to an American watch, compared to a Japanese watch. Help me out here. What are some of the ways that you do it? You've been working more siloed in this area. When you find a new collector and you have a few seconds of their time, how do you help them understand what's appealing about this interesting little slice of the industry, which is, the German tool watch?
First of all, it's great to hear that you could live with German watches for the rest of your life.
It's totally true.
No, for us, especially for our brand, not German watches, but for our brand, we have the slogan, others may show the time, Hanhart measures it. And that is very true for our brand. When you look at the at our collection. Usually when coming to a watch booth at a watch show, or when looking at our brands, you have 90% three-hands watches, and then maybe 10% or 5% chronographs. When you look at our brand, you have like 90% chronographs and then 10% three-hands watches. So we are really the specialist for when it comes to chronographs. And we have a very strong product focus. We think the quality of the product will, in the end, sell our product. And we're not so good in marketing. We're more, I always like to say, well, when you look at our company, we're 25 people, 25 employees, and we don't have one full-time marketing employee because we think the product focus is more important. What we do as well, different as others, we are very German when it comes to the time itself. We don't like negative regulation. So we never really understood why the movements are regulated to plus and minus. So usually it's plus and minus 4, plus minus 4, plus 6. And we don't want anyone to be late. So we regulate every hour of our watch to 0 to plus 8. What in fact is the same like minus plus 4, but maybe it sounds more. Well, maybe the other brands don't do it again out of a marketing perspective, but in our opinion, it just doesn't make sense.
So the idea that is, if your watch had to be wrong, better that it runs fast because it'll be early than you being late.
Exactly.
I never really thought about it that way. I mean, it makes sense. It's kind of sweet, right? It's like, we can't guarantee good performance all the time, but at least it'll be a funny mistake as opposed to you lose your job mistake. That's very charming. That's very charming. I didn't know that. Look, I mean, you said it yourself in there. The Germans are not good at the marketing. And what I extrapolate from that is Germans are often not good at explaining why they do what they do. They're like, you don't already know why? I don't have the tools to tell you. And that's where some of the charm is. The Swiss will market when they want to. I think they've kind of taken it from the French luxury world. The best Swiss marketers are essentially adopting various types of French marketing techniques, if it is sort of jewelry and fashion. And they will overpromise. I think that's something that I routinely see in French and Swiss luxury is a degree of overpromising. There's always, we're the best, we've done it first, ours is the most luxurious. They're always focusing on superlatives, which is the name of the show. And there's a reason why we have the name of the show. But I've never seen Germans do that. I've never seen Germans be like, no, we were the first to be on the moon. Like, it's just sort of this quiet, like, we have this tool that's designed to do this. And if you know anything about engineering and actually put our tool to the test, you too will see how proud we are. And it's like they don't understand, like, no one does that, right? Like, people like to hear superlative terms. They like to hear this types of things. So the Germans have always had some type of taboo against boasting, yet everything is engineered as though you were going to boast about it. And that's kind of the funny thing.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's in the communication. For example, when you look at many other brands, it's like when they change a rotor of a movement, they give them the movement their own name, and say it's their own movement. And we're like, as well, when it comes to the communication, we are very open about everything. As well, when you come to our factory in the Black Forest, you can basically see everything that we're doing. We don't have any closed parts of the building or hidden things. So we are, as well, when it comes to communication, if someone asks, we are extremely open to tell them and to give more insights. Or, in our opinion, we always don't like this marketing talk where you're not sure if you're being fooled or if it's the truth, you know?
So that presents an interesting conundrum because in sales, and we know this as Americans, people who tell the truth sometimes don't get as far as people who lie. Now, once a consumer finds out that you lie, you're in trouble, but the game is lie as long as you can without people really figuring it out. What is the strategy to compete in the marketplace? Because I think we'll both agree that as popular as watches are, it's a highly competitive marketplace. People demand great stories, great brands, great design, great values. Oftentimes, it's not enough to have it. You have to have other people out there know about it and believe it. So what is the sort of like, in your region in Germany, what is sort of the marketing strategy? And then specifically for Hanhart, what has been your marketing strategy? And of course, you can see some Hanhart marketing on aBlogtoWatch. So that's a good part of the strategy. But how would you define what the strategy is? Because again, I think that you'll agree today, people are dazzled by stories that, you know, is that true? That sounds too good to be true. I want to learn more. You know what I'm saying? It's a world where you have to push the limits with storytelling, even though, I mean, I agree. I have built my career on being honest. It's best to be authentic. But anyways, respond.
Yeah. No, so first of all, I think when it comes to marketing, our strongest marketing tool are our customers that are happy with our product. Because when we convince some, or when someone receives our product and really thinks, wow, that is a lot of watch that I get for the money that I paid, those are the persons that will as well tell others that the brand is good. And so first and foremost, as I said, we have a very strong product focus, and I think the product then speaks for itself, and our customers are the best marketing channel. But of course, we always need to try to be as present as possible because, like you said, it's a highly competitive market. But we, as a small brand with a very limited marketing budget, need to look how are we able to get the message out to the people. And it works more and more and better because well, let's say 10 years ago, we already put a strong focus on marketing our brand to end consumers. So we always wanted to reach out to the people. We go to as many watch shows as possible, but we don't go to the B2B shows because we don't think that B2B for a brand like Hanhart is the big solution, because 10 years ago, no jeweler, dealer, whatever was really interested in our brand because the consumers were not demanding it. And now, because we have such a strong end consumer focus, we get requests from dealers, and it completely changed because people want our brand. And one more thing that is, I think, very important, when going to these shows, you talk to the enthusiasts and you get the feedback from the enthusiasts, and you always see where you can improve. And for me, this is as well very helpful because it just helps to make our watches better. And over the past, it already helped improve our watches. And still today, we receive some comments where we think, well, that is a valid point. We should look at that. We should change that. And so that helps a lot.
Now, I think it's also important to say, and again, I agree with you that when you go to the shows, you learn invaluable things. And you and I have talked about this in the past, but I continue to feel that if you work at a brand, the most valuable feedback you'll ever get is just watching people interact with your products, even for a few minutes. It is insane. But at the same time, it's true that if you ask a consumer, especially in a vacuum, what kind of products do you want? What do you want? You will hear as many good answers as you will bad answers, meaning people will tell you, hey, Felix, I'd like to buy this. And then you make it. And they're like, nah, I don't want it. And you're like, but this is exactly what you described. Why don't you want it? So how do you, and you've done this for a while now, but how do you pick up on what type of commentary is worth listening to? Do you just sort of like listen to things that validate biases you already have? How do you develop a filter that allows you to know when feedback from a consumer is useful or something worth ignoring?
You're 100% right. It's extremely difficult. It's not always that you say, well, everything is, or every feedback is good feedback, but especially when it comes to quality topics, especially when people say, well, I've seen on that watch, I've seen that feature, or like, those micro adjustable clasps on bracelets, when people approach you with what they've seen from other brands or what they think would be great. Those things I think that you don't need a big filter for these comments, because it's obvious when you, from a quality perspective, get better, then you need to try to improve your product. But the second thing that you mentioned is the design perspective. And there you're 100% right. It's not always very clear. And I can give you as well an example from the recent past.
Yeah.
We had, when launching the new Aquasphere, we launched a dive watch collection last year called the Aquasphere. And it is our first proper dive watch, and we are really, really happy with the product. But when designing the Aquasphere, it took us 3 years from the first design to making the end product, so it always takes a long time. But when we were in the designing phase, we had different bezels and different fonts on the bezels. So the numerals were always different. And we had some fonts that were comparable with Tag or Omega or Longines or whatever. And we did an internal research with our shareholders, with partners, with the employees, and asked them, well, vote for your favorite bezel design. And the bezel that we realized in the end was the least voted for. Why did we still realize it that way? Why did we not want to have the font that everyone, now not everyone has that font, but our analysis was that you're really much more familiar with what you see on other watches and what you've seen in the past, but that does not make you distinctive. And in the long run, I'd like to compare it as well with the Tudor snowflake hands. In the beginning there were as well, there was a lot of criticism, and people said, "Oh, are these hands ugly? And who is getting these ideas?" But at a certain point, this is your design. At a certain point, your watch can be differentiated from others because of those design features. And so it's not always what the mass says they like is at the end the thing that you want to realize, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. I've been with a lot of brands through exercises where they have like, crowd-sourced design. They ask people questions. I've been through all permutations of this. And as you said that, I realized that another thing I appreciate about, I don't know if it's German brands or just sort of the German way of thinking, but Germans are completely comfortable saying to the consumer, no, you don't know. I work in this field and I know best. This is the right way to do it. This is the way that we recommend it. You will do it this way. Whereas certain other cultures are like, oh, they want to wear it that way? They want to wear that color? You know what? Go ahead. And Germans are like, watches should not be in this color. and that's the way it's going to be. And so that can be, a positive or a negative given the context. But it does, I think you'll agree, add a certain degree of flavor to the German watch experience, right?
Well, like you say, it's just a bit different.
So today, in terms of the technology and things like that, you said you made your first dive watch recently. You've talked a lot about having unique things. You talked about the way you regulate. Someone goes to the Hanhart website, they're going to see not all, but mostly, I guess you could say, vintage style designs. Some of the new watches you make, I think, are so original, people may not know what to make of them yet. They're like, is this something from the past or is this something new? But there's also, as you said, certain types of technology that you build into it. Help people understand that despite the external designs, where can they find technology for quality, durability, performance inside a Hanhart that may not be obvious?
Yeah, I think that the biggest development for us was 2 years ago, we presented the watch with our new HD12 steel. HD12 is heavy duty, the HD heavy duty steel, and the 12 is for 1,200 Vickers of hardness. And the HD12
It's a lot of Vickers.
steel, it's amazing. It's up to 1,200. And it's especially, or it's the surface hardness, because the core still is a steel that you won't find on every other watch, the 316L steel. But what we do is in a 2-layered process. So first of all, we infuse carbon atoms to the surface of the watch, so that to the surface of the steel, that makes the steel itself hard. So it's not a coating, it's infused into the steel. And after we infuse the carbon atoms, we add a transparent PVD layer, which is as well very hard. And we found out that it's just amazing for scratch resistance. We did a lot of testing with it. What we found out as well is that when you hit it with a hard object, it gets, what do you call it? Dings? No, it's like...
Yeah.
Dings?
It's an indentation.
Yeah, exactly. And because you push the hard surface into the softer core. So
yeah, I think it's called an eggshell effect, right?
No. The eggshell effect would be that the layer coats off, right? So
no, I think the eggshell effect is the external layer is the hardest and it's softer underneath. But I think we understand the point.
Okay. Yeah.
So go on.
So that was a major development for us. And if you compare the watches after a year of wearing, it's fantastic. Then we have on some watches we have added our shock protection system, which helps against, it's just an extra layer that helps against shocks. On some watches, we have as well anti-magnetic cases. So we are really trying to work with different technologies to make our watches better. When it comes to the anti-magnetic watches, it's as well always funny when we have the discussions with our watchmakers. They always tell us, why don't you make only anti-magnetic watches? Please only do the anti-magnetic cases. But you need a closed case back for that. And many people love to see the movement. So, yeah, we as well have the sapphire glass on the bottom.
So what do you think about those movements that uses the amagnetic parts? Is that too much? I mean, do you have to have your own whole system like Tudor or Omega does, or is it possible to have some amagnetic parts?
Well, I mean, all the movements are amagnetic in general. So the movements have developed a lot when it comes to the amagnetic shielding. But if you really, really, really want to have something that is completely anti-magnetic, you would need to have the soft iron core around it. So you put below the dial, you put soft iron, you have the movement holding ring of the movement as soft iron, and you have the case back out of soft iron. So the soft iron absorbs the magnetism and protects the movement.
It seems to be that for mechanical watches, that's the next frontier. You know, a lot of companies have got about as accurate as they could get. Maybe they've done a lot with shock resistance. I think you'll agree that some of the big companies, in trying to give people like new reasons to get excited about movements, anti-magnetism seems to be where they're focused on right now, right?
That is definitely a strong focus. And it's just because our world is changing as well. Magnetic fields are coming more and more. So it's just as well because the environment changes.
Now, as you continue to develop and you want to make more and more watches, especially when you have new technology, what is your gut instinct? And I've seen brands do that both ways. Do you take new technology and you build it into a classic looking watch? Or would you prefer to take new technology and build it into a modern looking watch? And I've seen brands go both ways about it. And I'm just curious, for someone like you with your tastes, where would you rather see new technology? Somehow incorporated in classic design or in a modern looking product?
So for us, first of all, when looking at new technologies, what we love to do most is technologies that really make the watch better. It's not just optical changes or, I don't know, some technological advances that don't really make the watch better. We're working as well on a new clasp mechanism right now. We said that the micro adjustment is something that people love, and I hope that we have something to present soon on that end as well, something very new. But when it comes to the kind of watches where we want to implement it, I think it doesn't really matter if it's a historical model or a modern one, because if the technology is great, you would want to have it in every single watch, It's just, for us, it's always the thought process behind it is more, now when it comes to a chronograph that is a pilot's chronograph, it does not necessarily need to be made for diving. It doesn't necessarily need 30 ADM water resistance. It doesn't need a helium valve. There are a couple of things where you just say, okay, what would be the needed technology for such a watch, and what don't we need to make the price point as well as good as possible. So we could, of course, do every watch with the hardened steel. We could do every watch with a helium valve. We could do every watch 30 ADM, but then the watches would be unnecessarily, for some models, just more expensive. So you always need to think about the price positioning as well.
Now, that's actually a great segue to the last thing that I wanted to ask about, and that has to do with price. And this is where things get so weird. If you know watches really well, I think it becomes less of an issue. But if you're just getting into watches, your first few years into it, the first thing you do is you learn about a brand, you go to their website, and you sort of check out their prices. And you come to a lot of conclusions about a brand based upon the prices. The problem, as you know, is that in some instances, you can get way more watch for $3,000 than you can for $8,000 or $10,000 or more. What, in your opinion, I don't know that anyone's answered this, but how do you really immediately grab someone's attention and say, we're not budget watches, we're not trying to be like something else, we're as much money as we think you need to spend on this design? Because I think that's really another thing about German watches. This is as much money as we think you need to spend on this design. Not more, not less, but if you want this type of watch that looks nice, this is what we think you could spend. Other companies don't do that. How do you think you should immediately tell someone that so they have this idea of what they're looking at? Because I'm sure you'll agree that even if when you get into it, you understand it, when you are a novice or first few years, this is incredibly difficult to understand just when you get to know a brand at first, right?
Exactly. It's extremely difficult and as well at the same time extremely confusing, because like you say, it's hard to understand why the watches, when you think basically it's the same technology, are having so many different price points. I can just say, for our brand at least, what we did 10 years ago, we do not work with large distributors we only have a one-layer distribution approach. So if you can cut out a certain margin where other people don't need to earn something, you're able to set a price point at a much, if you pass over that margin to the end consumer, you can position your products at a more attractive price point. And this helps us really to have the watches at a price where we think you get a lot of watch for the price that you pay. And our MSRPs, the suggested retail prices, are real prices. Our brand is not really discounted online. We don't see any, or as well, we don't see any issues with gray marketing or whatever. And this is, I would say, a big benefit when you slowly and steadily grow, but don't necessarily want to sell to everyone at every time, and you have a lot of pressure. For us, of course we want to grow. Of course we want more people to know Hanhart, but we're not like that. We would risk that our brand is diluted in some way through the internet.
I think that's a great way of sort of summing up the brand. And I think I'll also agree with you that when it comes down to it, these days people need to see and touch. It's great to become educated online. It's great to sort of have a list of brands or models you're interested in. But when it comes down to it, you have to see and touch the product. You know, I think that only when you do that can you sort of understand, what you're getting into. And so I encourage anyone to go out there to events where Hanhart is or otherwise. Really quick, a lot of your watches have the red cap on the chronograph. Obviously, this is a distinctive thing for the start button. What material is that? You're talking about the durability of the steel. What material do you make the red chronograph or pusher cap out of, and how durable is it?
Yeah, so we had lots of testing, trial and error with that. So
good.
Very good question. So in the beginning, it was like in the past, we had steel pushers painted. So, but there with the painting, you had the issue. Once the painting got off at an edge, it started to come off all over, and it did not look nice. No, it did not look nice after a couple of years. Then we had anodized aluminum, but it's just aluminum. It has a different color. It's not that really strong red that we wanted to have. So that was as well not the solution. And then we found a composite, a ceramic composite that is called high ceram. And it's mostly made out of ceramic with a small part of plastics as well to remove the, I don't know the English word for it. Ceramics is like when you hit something, it
shatters.
Breaks. It shatters. Yeah.
Crack.
So it cracks. Yeah. So to remove that, we added this high ceram material, adds a little bit of plastic, so it's really durable. It has the feeling of ceramics. It looks like ceramics. It's got this nice red coloring, and that's what it's made out of today.
Perfect. I knew there'd be a good answer to that. That's why I asked. But that adds that story right there about the red cap and the R&D you went through to make sure it's the right color, but also it wears correctly. That hopefully should explain a little bit about the culture at Hanhart, right?
I think it's like with everything at the watch, you constantly need to improve. And this is as well what sets you apart from all the other watch manufacturers, you know? If you see someone starting with a new watch brand, we have seen so many things already, and we've lived through so many things. So it's just often not that really comparable. You need to make those learnings to be able to produce better watches. And yeah, our philosophy is when we see something where we can improve on, we really need to get our hands on it.
We're out of time, unfortunately. I encourage everyone to go to the Hanhart website. That's HANHART.com. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Hanhart CEO Felix Wallner. Felix, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ariel.